As the sun set over the golden spires of Zaloria's capital city, the air shimmered with the faint hum of crystal energy towers. Lyra, a seasoned warrior of the Zalorian Guard, watched the horizon from her vantage point on the Council Citadel's observation deck. She had heard rumors of the human ship, a damaged diplomatic vessel seeking refuge, and now she was to be its appointed guardian. The idea didn't sit well with her. Zaloria had long maintained its neutrality, but allowing alien visitors to walk among them was unprecedented. Behind her, footsteps echoed softly on the polished onyx floor. Lyra turned to find Jorin, her fellow guard and close confidant, approaching. "They've been cleared to land," Jorin announced, his voice measured. "A light transport will be arriving at the main dock within the hour." "And the council?" Lyra asked, tightening her grip on the silver staff she carried. "They've decided on a cautious welcome," Jorin said. "It's up to us to make sure they stay out of trouble." Lyra sighed. "Let's hope these humans know how to behave themselves." The landing dock buzzed with muted activity as Lyra and Jorin stood at attention. When the human shuttle touched down, its sleek, metallic hull glinting under the amber lights, the pair exchanged a glance. The ship's ramp lowered, releasing a hiss of compressed air, and two figures descended. The first was a tall, broad-shouldered man clad in a practical yet unremarkable uniform. His hair was cut short, his stance confident but not overtly intimidating. The second figure was shorter, stockier, and carried a small case that hummed faintly, suggesting some sort of portable technology. The taller man, apparently the captain, gave Lyra and Jorin a quick, appraising look. "I'm Captain James Holt of the United Systems Alliance," he said, his tone calm but direct. "This is my engineer, Mason. Thanks for allowing us to touch down. Our ship's been through some trouble." Jorin stepped forward. "I am Jorin. This is Lyra, your assigned guardian while you remain on Zaloria. You are to follow our directives at all times and refrain from—" "Jorin," Lyra interjected, holding up a hand. "We're here to ensure their safety, not lecture them." She turned to Holt. "Captain, we'll escort you and your crew to the guest quarters. Once settled, the council will want to meet you tomorrow." Holt nodded. "We appreciate your hospitality. Mason, let's stay out of their way and keep things easy." Mason gave a brief salute and followed the guards as they led the way through a long corridor bathed in golden light. The air inside the facility was cool, carrying the faint scent of minerals. Jorin took the lead, but Holt fell into step beside Lyra. "So, Lyra," Holt began, his voice conversational, "how long have you been with the Zalorian Guard?" She cast him a sidelong glance. "Long enough to know when someone's fishing for information." Holt smiled, a slight quirk of his lips. "Fair enough. Consider me curious, not prying. Your people have a reputation for being, well, insular. This is a rare opportunity to see Zaloria firsthand. Just don't mistake curiosity for permission to wander," Lyra said, though her tone had softened. Their path led them into a grand atrium, where delicate crystal formations floated in midair, glowing faintly. Mason slowed his pace, craning his neck to take in the sight. "This place is amazing. It's like nothing I've seen back home." "It's not just for show," Jorin said without turning. "The crystals regulate our energy systems, maintain the climate, and serve as data conduits. Every part of our world is designed for efficiency." Holt whistled softly. "And here I thought we had the monopoly on advanced tech. Seems we're still learning." Lyra felt a small flicker of pride at the comment, though she quickly buried it. Zaloria has always relied on its own innovations. We've never needed outsiders before. "Well," Holt said, his tone light, "we're not here to disrupt that. Just looking for a safe harbor until we're back on our feet." They reached the guest quarters, a series of modest yet elegantly furnished chambers. Lyra gestured to the doors. "These rooms are at your disposal. Meals will be delivered on schedule, and we'll have someone on hand to address any needs you have." "Much appreciated," Holt said. He hesitated, then added, "I understand your caution. We're strangers here, and I imagine that makes it hard to trust us. But I promise, we're not looking to cause any trouble. Lyra met his gaze, noting the sincerity in his expression. That remains to be seen, Captain. For now, stay within this wing. We'll handle things as they come. As the humans entered their quarters, Jorin turned to Lyra. What do you make of them? She frowned slightly, folding her arms. They're polite, but we've barely scratched the surface. Let's see how they conduct themselves before we pass judgment. Jorin nodded. Agreed. Let's keep an eye on them. Lyra watched the door close behind Holt and Mason, her mind already churning with questions. For all her confidence, she couldn't shake the feeling that these humans might bring more than just their damaged ship to Zaloria. The path ahead seemed uncertain, and though she had faced countless challenges before, this one felt different. Chapter 2. The Challenge. The Zalorian training grounds were a striking contrast to the elegant cities Lyra and Jorin called home. Wide open spaces bordered by tall, crystalline towers provided ample room for drills, sparring sessions, and strategic simulations. The guards typically used the space to refine their techniques and prepare for any unexpected threats, though few truly believed an enemy would ever breach Zaloria's defenses. Lyra paced along the perimeter of the grounds, her boots crunching against the finely polished stone. Beside her, Jorin adjusted his grip on his practice staff. The air between them was tense. Let me get this straight, Lyra said, turning her sharp gaze to Jorin. You want me to duel the human captain? Publicly? It was his idea, Jorin replied. He approached me after breakfast and asked if he could observe our training sessions. Then he suggested a friendly match. Lyra stopped and folded her arms. And you agreed? Jorin raised his hands defensively. I didn't commit to anything. I told him it would be up to you. Great, Lyra muttered. Why does this feel like some kind of test? Before Jorin could answer, Captain James Holt strolled into view. The human was dressed in simple, flexible combat gear, a stark departure from the ceremonial attire they had seen him in the day before. Behind him, Mason was carrying a small crate filled with what looked like training equipment. Wooden swords, weighted gloves, and something that resembled a set of protective pads. Captain, Lyra said, narrowing her eyes, I hear you're interested in a match. Holt stopped a respectful distance away and gave her a measured nod. Only if you're willing. I'm not here to step on any toes, but since we'll be on Zaloria for a while, I thought it might be useful to exchange techniques. I'd love to see how you fight. And why should I indulge you? Lyra asked, tilting her head slightly. Holt offered a disarming smile. Because it's rare to find someone as skilled as you. I've heard the stories about Zalorian guards. I figured I might learn a thing or two. Flattery won't earn you a match, she said, though the corner of her mouth twitched in amusement. Still, I suppose it could be educational. Lyra, are you sure? Jorin asked quietly. Relax, Jorin, she said, stepping forward. A little friendly sparring never hurt anyone. The group moved to the center of the training grounds, where the polished stone was marked with intricate patterns. Lyra shed her ceremonial jacket, leaving her arms bare and her stance free. She picked up a Zalorian practice staff, sleek, lightweight, and reinforced with a crystalline core. Across from her, Holt selected a wooden training blade from Mason's crate and gave it a few experimental swings. No blasters, no hidden gadgets, just a straight-up spar, Holt said. Sound fair? Fair enough, Lyra replied, her tone firm. Let's see what humans can do. The match began with a flurry of motion. Lyra moved first, closing the distance in a single leap and swinging her staff toward Holt's midsection. He blocked the strike with his blade, the sharp crack echoing across the grounds. They circled each other, exchanging blows and feints, neither fully committing to a strike yet. You're fast, Holt remarked as he deflected another attack. I'll give you that. You're not bad yourself, Lyra admitted, her voice laced with concentration. The tempo increased. Lyra pressed the advantage, her strikes flowing in seamless combinations. Holt, however, proved agile and adaptive, shifting his movements to counter her rhythm. As their weapons clashed, A small crowd of Zalorian guards gathered to watch, their expressions a mix of curiosity and surprise. "I didn't expect this kind of fight from a diplomat," Lyra said, swinging her staff low. Holt jumped back, avoiding the blow by a fraction. "Let's just say I've picked up a few things over the years." The fight grew more intense. Lyra attempted a complex feint, only to have Holt predict her move and sidestep her strike. He followed up with a counter that forced her onto the defensive. For the first time in years, Lyra felt a genuine challenge. She adjusted her stance and smiled, a flicker of respect forming in her eyes. After several minutes, the match ended in a near draw. Both fighters stepped back, breathing heavily. Lyra lowered her staff and studied Holt carefully. "You're better than I expected," she admitted grudgingly. "And you're every bit as skilled as the stories say," Holt replied, grinning. As the crowd dispersed, Jorin approached, a look of disbelief on his face. "I didn't think a human could keep up with you." "He's not just any human," Lyra said quietly. "There's more to him than meets the eye." "Good match, Lyra," Holt said, extending his hand. "I hope we can do this again sometime." She took his hand and shook it firmly. "Next time, Captain, I won't hold back." As they parted ways, Lyra found herself wondering about Holt. This was no ordinary visitor. He was someone who could challenge her, perhaps even teach her something new. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of excitement about what lay ahead. Chapter 3: The Connection. The council's deliberations were set for the following day, leaving the human visitors and their guards with little to do but wait. Lyra found herself in an unusual situation, tasked not with defense or confrontation, but with playing host. She wasn't used to lingering in quiet quarters, yet here she was, standing in the spacious atrium of the guest wing, watching Captain Holt inspect a Zalorian art display. "Does every building on this planet have a museum inside it?" Holt asked with a faint smile, gesturing toward the floating crystal sculptures. The vibrant, shifting colors cast patterns of light on the walls. "These displays are more than art," Lyra replied. "Each sculpture is encoded with the history of a Zalorian achievement. See that one there?" She pointed to a tall, slender crystal that pulsed with a soft blue light. "It tells the story of our first planetary defense system." Holt leaned closer, his gaze curious. "How do you mean encoded? It looks like solid glass to me." "It's solid, yes, but within it are embedded pulses of energy, stored patterns that can be accessed and translated. It's a way of preserving knowledge in a form that can last for generations." Lyra stepped closer, brushing her fingers against the base of the sculpture. "Touch it, and it will show you." Holt glanced at her hand, then back at the crystal. "I don't think I should be poking at your historical artifacts." "It's not fragile," Lyra said, an amused edge to her voice. "Go on." Holt hesitated before placing his palm flat against the crystal's surface. A faint hum filled the air, and a projection formed, a glowing map of Zaloria, with points of light representing the old planetary defense stations. Words, images, and figures shifted within the projection, telling the story of their construction. "Impressive," Holt said quietly, his eyes tracking the images. "We have museums back home, of course, but nothing quite like this. It's like your history is alive." "We value preservation," Lyra replied, stepping to his side. "It's how we maintain our identity." "Identity is important," Holt said, pulling his hand back as the projection faded. He glanced at her. "What about your personal history? I know the official Zalorian records, but I don't know much about you." Lyra crossed her arms, considering the question. "There's not much to say. I was born in a small settlement on the southern continent. Joined the Guard at a young age. I've spent my life ensuring our world stays safe." "And what do you think of humans so far?" Holt asked. His tone was light, but the question carried weight. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied him. The human captain stood with an easy posture, yet there was an underlying sharpness to his movements, a sense that he was always evaluating, always preparing. It reminded her of her own training, the discipline that had shaped her life. "I think," she said slowly, "you're Different than I expected. Different good or different bad? That remains to be seen, Lyra said with a small smile. Before Holt could reply, Jorin entered the atrium. His expression was one of controlled annoyance. Captain, your engineer is requesting assistance. Something about recalibrating a power cell. Holt raised an eyebrow. Mason? He's usually pretty self-sufficient. Did he say why he needed me? He didn't elaborate, Jorin said flatly. But he's in the maintenance bay. Best you see what he wants. Duty calls, Holt said, turning back to Lyra. Thanks for the history lesson. I'll see you around. Lyra nodded, watching him leave. When he was gone, she turned to Jorin. Did Mason really need help? Jorin shrugged. I thought you might want some space. Space from what? You've been spending a lot of time talking with the captain, Jorin said. That's unusual for you. He's a guest, Lyra said sharply. It's my job to ensure he understands our world. Is that all it is? Jorin's tone was carefully neutral. What are you implying? Jorin held up a hand. Nothing. Just noticing that you seem interested. Interested in doing my duty, Lyra said firmly. Jorin didn't press further. Instead, he stepped closer to the crystal sculpture Holt had touched earlier. Do you really think we can trust them? Lyra sighed. I don't know. But I do know that withholding trust entirely won't get us anywhere. We'll see how the council meeting goes tomorrow. Jorin nodded, though he still looked skeptical. Just be careful, Lyra. I always am, she replied. As the evening progressed, Lyra found herself replaying her conversation with Holt. She hadn't meant to share so much about her people's history, but his genuine curiosity had drawn her in. He seemed less like the outsider she had initially assumed, and more like someone searching for common ground. It was unsettling. Shaking off the thought, she returned to her quarters. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more decisions, and more chances to determine whether these humans were truly allies, or something else entirely. Chapter 4. The Intrusion. The faint hum of the crystal towers in the main atrium provided a soothing backdrop as Lyra and Jorin led Captain Holt and Mason toward the council chamber. Today, the humans would formally present their case to the Zalorian leadership. Lyra kept her tone neutral as she briefed them. The council will expect detailed answers. They'll want to know exactly why you're here, how long you plan to stay, and whether your presence poses any risk to Zaloria. Holt nodded. Understood. We'll be as transparent as possible. We're not here to cause trouble. Jorin glanced at him, his tone measured. Let's hope they believe you. As they rounded the corner into the council corridor, Lyra stopped short. The door to the chamber stood slightly ajar, a rare and troubling sight. She motioned for silence, and the group halted. Jorin reached for the small communication device on his belt, but Lyra shook her head and drew her staff. Stay here, she whispered to the others. She stepped forward, staff at the ready, and nudged the door open further. Inside, the chamber was dimly lit, and the usual council representatives were nowhere to be seen. Instead, a lone figure stood near the central podium, their movements deliberate as they adjusted a small, glowing device. Identify yourself, Lyra commanded, her voice firm. The figure turned, revealing a mask and dark, fitted clothing, clearly not a Zalorian. The intruder didn't respond. Instead, they reached for something on their belt, and Lyra sprang into action. She closed the distance in a heartbeat, her staff sweeping toward the device. The figure dodged, and a sharp crack echoed through the chamber as their counterattack narrowly missed Lyra. Jorin rushed in, staff raised, and joined the fray. The two guards worked in tandem, driving the intruder toward the rear of the chamber. The masked figure was quick, but the coordinated strikes from Lyra and Jorin forced them into a defensive position. Lyra's staff caught the device, sending it skittering across the floor. Holt and Mason entered cautiously, staying near the doorway. What's going on? Holt asked, his voice low. An intruder, Lyra snapped, not taking her eyes off her opponent. Stay back. The intruder made a final, desperate move, pulling a small sphere from their belt and slamming it to the ground. A blinding flash filled the chamber, and when it cleared, the figure was gone. Lyra cursed under her breath, her grip on the staff tightening. Jorin retrieved the discarded device, his brow furrowed. This isn't Zalorian tech. Holt stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of peace. I know that design. It's not ours, but I've seen something similar before. It belongs to a faction known for sabotage and espionage. What faction? Lyra demanded, turning to him. They call themselves the Kithari, Holt said. A shadowy group operating on the fringes of our trade routes. They're known to infiltrate advanced civilizations, steal tech, and destabilize governments. If they're here, it's bad news. Jorin shot a look at Lyra. We need to inform the council immediately. Lyra nodded. Agreed. But first, we need to secure this device and determine what they were after. Mason stepped forward, examining the glowing mechanism. I can help with that. I have experience reverse engineering tech. If we can understand its purpose, we might figure out what they were trying to achieve. Fine, Lyra said. Jorin, take it to the guard's research division. Mason, go with him and assist. Jorin gave a curt nod. On it. As they left, Lyra turned to Holt. You knew about the Kithari and didn't mention them before. Why? Because I didn't think they'd show up here, Holt said, his voice steady. They've always stayed on the edges of civilized space. If they've come to Zaloria, it means they've found something they consider valuable. And you think we have something they want? Lyra asked. Not think, no, Holt said. Zaloria is a shining example of stability and innovation. That makes it a tar. Together, your knowledge of Zaloria and my experience with their tactics. Otherwise, they'll strike again. Lyra considered his words. She had her doubts about Holt, but he'd proven himself capable in their sparring match. Now, he was offering his expertise in what seemed to be a genuine effort to help. Fine, she said after a moment. But don't think this makes us allies. We're cooperating to protect my world, nothing more. Fair enough, Holt replied. Let's figure out what they're after, and stop them before it's too late. Chapter 5: The Revelation. The council chamber had been locked down and swept for any remaining threats. The air was heavy with tension as Lyra and Jorin stood before the gathered council members, the stolen Kithari device resting on the table between them. The crystalline walls shimmered faintly, casting soft light on the solemn faces of the councilors. We have confirmed that the device was Kithari in origin, Lyra began, her tone firm. It appears to be a form of data siphon, designed to extract sensitive information without detection. One of the counselors, a tall man with sharp, angular features, leaned forward. What kind of data did it manage to obtain? Jorin stepped in. We're still analyzing that. But initial findings suggest it targeted our energy grid schematics and advanced defensive protocols. A murmur ran through the council. The implications were clear. With such information, the Kithari could exploit weaknesses in Zaloria's defenses. Do we know how the intruder got inside the chamber? Another counselor asked. Lyra tightened her grip on her staff. Not yet. The infiltration suggests they may have had help, either from someone inside or another agent we haven't identified. Before anyone could respond, the chamber doors slid open, and Captain Holt and Mason entered. Holt's expression was serious, his steps purposeful as he approached the council table. I think I can shed some light on that. The counselors turned their attention to him, some with curiosity, others with visible suspicion. What do you know, Captain? One of them asked. We've encountered the Kithari before, Holt said. They don't typically strike at random. When they target a world as secure as Zaloria, it's because they believe there's something here worth the risk. My guess? They're after a specific piece of tech, something that would give them a serious advantage if they could replicate it. Lyra crossed her arms. And how would you know that? Holt met her gaze without hesitation. Because we've seen them do it before. On other worlds, they've gone after advanced power cores, stealth systems, even experimental drive technology. They operate in the shadows, plant devices like this one, and vanish before anyone realizes the extent of the breach. A counselor frowned. You're suggesting they've identified a particular target on Zaloria. What exactly are they after? That's the question, isn't it? Holt replied. We need to determine what on your planet is valuable enough for the Kithari to risk exposing themselves. My team and I can help. We have experience with their methods. The room grew silent. Lyra watched the counselors exchange glances, weighing the decision. Finally, the lead counselor spoke. Very well. Captain Holt, you may assist our guards in investigating this matter. However, your movements will be monitored at all times. Understood, Holt said. We're here to help. After the meeting, Lyra and Jorin walked with Holt and Mason through the corridor leading to the research division. The tension between them was palpable. Why didn't you tell us about the Kithari sooner? Lyra asked, her voice edged with frustration. I didn't know they'd show up here, Holt said evenly. When we landed, we were just looking for a place to make repairs. But when that intruder appeared, I recognized the pattern. I've dealt with their tactics before. And you conveniently waited until now to share that? Lyra pressed. Holt stopped walking and turned to face her. Look, I understand why you don't trust me. I wouldn't trust me either if I were in your position. But I'm telling you, the Kithari don't stop once they've started. If you want to protect your people, you're going to need my insight. Jorin stepped forward. We don't need your insight, Captain. Zaloria has defended itself for centuries. And yet here we are, Holt said calmly. They breached your council chamber and planted a device. You can keep pretending you don't need outside help, or we can work together to stop them. Lyra held his gaze for a long moment, then sighed. Fine, but understand this, Captain. I'm trusting you out of necessity, not because I want to. That's fair, Holt said. I'll do what it takes to earn that trust. They continued to the research division, where Mason and Jorin joined the Zalorian tech team to analyze the device in greater detail. Holt and Lyra stood just outside, their earlier tension lingering. You know, Holt said after a moment, I didn't mean to put you in this position. I'm just trying to help. You've certainly made things more complicated, Lyra replied. But if you can help us stop the Kithari, then I'll deal with the complications. Holt offered a small, understanding nod. That's all I'm asking. As the analysis began inside the lab, Lyra and Holt watched through the observation window. Though the room was filled with activity, the weight of what they faced loomed over them. If the Kithari were truly after Zaloria's secrets, it would take more than skilled warriors to keep them at bay. It would take careful planning, precise action, and a degree of cooperation that neither side had expected. Chapter 6. The Alliance. The council hall buzzed with the low hum of conversation as representatives from every major Zalorian province gathered. The air was tense. Even the normally placid glow of the crystalline walls seemed subdued. The Kithari infiltration had left the council shaken. Now, with the discovery of another compromised data core, the stakes were higher than ever. Lyra and Jorin stood at their usual posts near the hall's main entrance. But today, their attention was divided. Captain Holt and Mason were seated at a table nearby, scrolling through datapads and comparing notes with the head of Zaloria's Security Council. The two humans looked uncharacteristically serious, their usual banter replaced with quiet, focused discussion. What's the status on the energy grid data? Lyra asked, addressing Jorin. Still being analyzed, Jorin replied. But the initial report says the Kithari didn't manage to extract everything. They got fragments, schematics, power regulation protocols, but nothing that would immediately cripple us. Yet, Lyra muttered. She glanced toward Holt and Mason. They've been unusually quiet today. Jorin followed her gaze and shrugged. Maybe they finally understand the gravity of the situation. Or maybe they're hiding something, Lyra countered. You still don't trust them, do you? I trust actions more than words, Jorin said. Holt's helped, yes, but he always seems to know a little more than he lets on. And Mason? He's too good with our tech for someone who claims to be an engineer from a completely different system. Before Lyra could respond, one of the counselors approached. Captain Holt, the council is ready for your briefing. Holt nodded, stood, and turned to Mason. You stay here and finish the grid analysis. I'll handle this. As Holt walked to the front of the chamber, the room fell silent. The counselors leaned forward in their seats, the tension palpable. Holt began, his voice steady. We've confirmed that the Kithari are targeting Zaloria's energy and defense systems. They're not just stealing data, they're looking for weaknesses. But their infiltration methods are complex, and unless we understand their endgame, we can't counter them effectively. And what do you propose, Captain? Asked one of the council's senior members. Holt took a deep breath. An alliance. My team and I have dealt with the Kithari before. We understand their tactics. Together, with your resources and our experience, we can not only protect Zaloria but eliminate their presence here entirely. The council murmured among themselves, some clearly skeptical. One counselor spoke up. Why should we rely on outsiders to protect us? Our people have maintained peace and security for generations. Holt met their gaze evenly. You've maintained peace because no one dared challenge you. The Kithari are different. They don't engage in open warfare, they undermine from within. If you don't adapt, they'll keep coming back, chipping away at your defenses until you can't stop them. Lyra watched from the sidelines, conflicted. Holt's words were logical, but that didn't erase her doubts. Jorin leaned closer and whispered, if we agree to this, we're putting a lot of trust in a man we barely know. Sometimes we have to take risks, Lyra whispered back. If the Kithari return, we can't handle them alone. Holt continued, addressing the council as if sensing their hesitation. I understand your reluctance. I'd feel the same in your place. But this is an opportunity to secure Zaloria's future. Not just for today, but for years to come. Let us help you. Together, we can make sure the Kithari never set foot on your world again. After a long pause, the lead counselor raised a hand. We will deliberate. You'll have our decision by tomorrow. Holt nodded and stepped down, returning to the table where Mason was still working. How's it looking? He asked. Mason sighed. Not good. The data fragments we recovered suggest they were targeting the main hub's primary control protocols. If they'd gotten full access, they could have remotely destabilized the entire network. Holt frowned. We need to find out how they're choosing their targets. Is it random? Or is someone feeding them information? That's the million-credit question, Mason muttered. But if the council agrees to the alliance, we might have the resources to find out. Lyra approached their table. And if they don't? Holt looked up, his expression unreadable. Then we keep working with what we have. I'm not walking away until this threat is neutralized. Jorin joined them, his stance tense. You seem pretty invested in our survival, Captain. Makes me wonder why. Holt's lips twitched into a faint smile. Let's just say I have a personal dislike for the Kithari. They've done enough damage in my corner of the galaxy. I'd rather not see them do the same here. The four of them fell into a contemplative silence. Despite their differences, it was clear they all shared a common goal. The Kithari were out there, and if the council agreed to the alliance, their chances of defeating them would be much stronger. But if the council refused, the road ahead would be far more challenging and far more dangerous. Chapter 7. The Celebration. Zaloria's Grand Plaza was unlike anything Captain Holt had seen before. Illuminated by floating crystals, the open square buzzed with activity. Musicians played instruments that emitted harmonious tones, while dancers performed choreographed routines that seemed to weave their movements with the lights. The air carried a faint scent of sweet flowers, mingled with the savory aroma of local cuisine being prepared at colorful stalls around the edges. Holt stood near the center of the plaza with Lyra and Jorin, observing the celebration. The council had officially approved the alliance earlier that day, marking the first formal partnership between Zalorians and humans. This festival was the council's way of reinforcing unity, a public demonstration of their shared commitment to face the Kithari together. Does it always feel this serene here? Holt asked, glancing around. Even with the stakes as high as they are? Jorin shrugged. Zalorians are taught to balance calm and action. Tonight we celebrate. Tomorrow we return to the fight. Lyra nodded. It's how we keep our focus. Celebrations like this remind us what we're protecting. Holt watched the performers for a moment, then turned to Mason, who had just joined them, holding a plate piled with some sort of glazed fruit. "What do you think, Mason? A little different from our usual fare, huh?" Mason grinned, biting into the fruit. "A lot better than the rations on our ship, that's for sure. I could get used to this." Jorin smirked. "Don't get too comfortable. You're still under our watch." "Relax," Mason said, holding up his hands. "I'm just enjoying the moment. It's not every day you see a festival like this." As the celebration continued, Holt found himself drawn to one of the musical groups. The instruments resembled elongated flutes and circular string devices. Yet their sounds were completely alien, ethereal, and haunting. Lyra noticed him listening intently. "Curious, Captain?" she asked. "More than curious," he admitted. "It's beautiful. What are they playing?" "It's called the Wind and Stone Suite," Lyra explained. "It tells the story of Zaloria's unification centuries ago. Each movement represents a different region of our planet coming together as one." Holt nodded, the melody washing over him. "Your culture has a way of blending history and art that we don't often see back home." "It's part of who we are," Lyra said. "But it's not just art. The final movement is a reminder that unity requires effort. It's not something we take for granted." Their conversation was interrupted by one of the counselors approaching. The tall, stern-looking man inclined his head toward Holt. "Captain, I wanted to personally thank you for your efforts so far. Without your insights, we might not have uncovered the extent of the Kithary's infiltration." Holt shook the counselor's hand. "I appreciate that, but the credit goes to your people as well. Without your resources and Lyra's team, we wouldn't have made it this far." The counselor nodded, then turned to Lyra. "It seems our new allies are earning their place here. Would you agree?" Lyra hesitated, her gaze flicking to Holt. "They've proven themselves useful. I still have questions, but their help can't be denied." "Good," the counselor said. "We'll need that cooperation in the days ahead. Enjoy the evening." He walked off, blending into the crowd. As the night wore on, Holt found himself relaxing more than he expected. He, Lyra, Jorin, and Mason wandered through the festival, sampling the food, observing the performers, and even trying their hand at a few Zalorian games. At one point, Jorin challenged Holt to a sparring contest using mock training staves set up at a demonstration booth. Holt took the challenge in stride, managing to hold his own long enough to earn a reluctant nod of respect from Jorin. "You're improving, Captain," Jorin said after the match. "Or you're going easy on me," Holt replied, grinning. Lyra watched the exchange with a faint smile. Though she still had her doubts, it was clear that a bond, if not trust, then at least camaraderie, was forming between them. Felt strange, but not unwelcome. By the time the final movement of the Wind and Stone Suite began, the plaza was aglow with soft, shifting light. The crowd grew still, listening as the haunting melody reached its crescendo. Holt glanced at Lyra, standing a few paces away, her expression serene but thoughtful. He considered saying something but decided against it. Instead, he let the music speak for itself, a reminder of the unity they were building, even in the face of looming challenges. Chapter 8: The Promise. The warm light of Zaloria's twin suns bathed the crystalline towers in soft hues of gold and pink. The streets were calm now, a stark contrast to the bustling festival from the night before. Captain Holt stood on the observation platform overlooking the city, arms crossed, his thoughts distant. The mission was far from over, but for the first time in a while, there was a sense that progress had been made. Lyra stepped onto the platform, her boots clicking lightly against the polished stone. "You've been up here a while." Holt turned, offering a faint smile. "Just needed some air. It's peaceful up here." She walked over to stand beside him. "Zaloria values moments of peace, but we know they're never permanent. That's why we prepare for what's to come." Holt nodded. "You always seem ready for the next fight. I admire that. Back on Earth, we don't have the same luxury. Our battles come fast, unexpected. Sometimes it feels like we're always playing catch-up." Lyra glanced at him, her gaze steady. "You've adapted, though. You've shown that you can handle yourself." "Thanks," But it's not just about me, Holt replied. I have a team. They count on me just like your guards rely on you. That's what drives me. Making sure we're all ready for whatever's coming. They stood in silence for a moment, the wind tugging lightly at their clothes. The city below sparkled in the soft sunlight, its beauty a reminder of what they were fighting to protect. What's your next step? Lyra asked, breaking the quiet. Holt took a deep breath. We keep digging into the Kithari's motives, figure out why they targeted your systems in the first place. If we can cut them off at the source, we stand a chance of keeping them from ever coming back. And you'll be working with us to do that, Lyra said. It wasn't a question, but a statement. Absolutely, Holt replied. We might come from different worlds, but we're on the same side now. And honestly, I think that's the only way we'll come out on top, together. Lyra studied him for a moment before offering a faint smile. You've come a long way since you landed here. I didn't think much of you at first, but you've proven yourself. Holt chuckled softly. I'll take that as a compliment. From you, that means something. You should, Lyra said, her tone light, though the sincerity in her eyes was unmistakable. Mason's voice broke through the peaceful moment as he approached the platform. Hate to interrupt, but we just got a message from the research team. They've made a breakthrough on that Kithari device. Holt turned, his expression sharpening. What kind of breakthrough? They figured out the data fragments. Looks like the Kithari were after a prototype energy core your people have been developing, Mason explained, looking at Lyra. A core that could potentially power an entire fleet of ships, or worse, something big enough to destabilize a planet. Lyra's face hardened. If the Kithari get their hands on that core, they won't, Holt interrupted. Not if we stop them now. Lyra nodded firmly. Then we need to secure that prototype. Bring it back to the central vaults, and make sure every entry point is guarded. Agreed, Holt said. Mason, can you coordinate with the Council's tech team? On it, Mason replied, already moving toward the stairwell. As he left, Lyra turned back to Holt. This alliance, it's not just about defeating the Kithari. It's about learning from each other. You've already shown us a new way of thinking, unorthodox, yes, but effective. And you've taught us the importance of preparation and long-term strategy, Holt said. We each bring something to the table. That's what will make us stronger. She met his gaze, her expression serious but calm. We have a long road ahead, Captain. I won't pretend it'll be easy, but as long as we stay true to this alliance, I think we can handle it. I'm with you on that, Holt said, and I'll do everything I can to make sure we see this THR. Others' backs, and that was something neither of them would take lightly.